Thank you very much. My name is Roland Valoria. I'm introducing the session on diminutive polypectomy. I have with me some very illustrious people moderating, including three people from across the world: Dr. Sidhu from Westmead in Sydney, Dr. Ralph Lee in Ottawa, Canada, and Dr. Amir Klein, who's been with us for a while so far, in Haifa, Israel. I also have two local experts, Dr. Wolf, who I've not yet met before, but from Roeselare, and Dr. Stephen Utrieve from Antwerp, and they're the local faculty here.
Thank you, Rod. Yeah, I was going to make the apology, but now you not to make the apology. So I'm going to go over some points that John already alluded on in his previous talk. Really slowly, Alok already showed this first time in 1992. Safe and effective technique, cold snare polypectomy for removal of diminutive polyps. And that's also the guideline from the ESGE for polyps of this size. So I'm going to go over a dozen of tips for optimal technique with you guys. First one, so really have 12 tips. You have to start with the correct position before you do a diminutive polypectomy or a cold snare resection. So you want to be in the 6 o'clock position, the polyp in the 6 o'clock position. You want to be close to the polyp with your scope. If you're in an unstable position, you want to ask someone to hold the scope for you. Don't be afraid to ask. You want to get the plane right. And when your snare is out, the V of the snare should be really in parallel to the plane you're cutting through. So you want to be at the left side of the slide. You see you're way too far out from the scope. You're not even seeing the polyp anyway. But you want to be like the right side of the polyp, really close with your catheter to the polyp. So this is an example of the wrong plane where you're going to cut like this. It's hard to see the polyp here, but it's going to be a difficult resection or an incomplete resection. Then, okay, you see a small polyp. You think, I'm going to use a cold snare resection. To remove this, you want to ask for the right type of snare to the nurse. You want to use a dedicated cold snare. So what it is, a dedicated cold snare, that's a stiff, thin-wired snare of 0.3 millimeters versus the bit bigger snares we use in hot snare resection. These are 0.4 or more. The evidence of using a dedicated cold snare, we know it's safe regardless of whether you use a thick or a thin-wired snare, as long as you have a wide margin. But you get a nice crispy resection. It's very easy to cut. It's easy to inspect the margins for residuals. And examples of dull snares, of cold snares, are the SnareMaster Plus and the Captivator Cold. So the snare's out. You've chosen a dedicated cold snare. Now you want to really pin the polyp down. So you want to press your big wheel fully up, and that's easiest if you're in the 6 o'clock position. And you want your snare also to be correctly opened. So if you really fully open the snare, you're going to see on the left side of the picture, the pressure of your scope is really exerted at the tip of the snare catheter. So it won't be in the correct position if you really open the snare. If you fully open the snare, so you're going to be on the right side, where you get the V just coming out of the catheter. Then you opened your snare. You want to take a wide margin of normal. This is really critical. I think I made an explanation point, yes, because we don't have any protective effect of diathermy here, unless we're using a hot snare resection. So you want to have at least 1 to 2 millimeter, at least, and you want to aim for and this picture will come up a few times, I think. You want to aim for the fried egg. So the egg yolk, the yellow is in the middle as the polyp, and the white is the normal tissue. You really want your snare over the white, over the yellow, and you want some white in your snare too. These are some good examples. Where you see the polyp is in the middle of the snare, and you have some white normal tissue around it. These are some bad examples where you see that the polyp is at the edge of the snare. You're going to get an incomplete resection and then a new polyp within a few years. Then you've correctly placed your snare around the polyp. It's best to visualize the closure. And then you're really sure afterwards, even if the defect is a bit difficult to inspect, that you're sure that you have all of the polyp, and the closure and the cutting itself can be relatively quickly by the nurse compared to a hot snare polypectomy, where you want the snare really to grab the tissue and then do the cutting via diathermy. Here you want the snare itself to cut it, so it can be more quick than with a hot snare section. Afterwards, so the polyp is cut off. Now you want to inspect the defect with water, so directly via your water jet right into the defect, and this will create a submucosal cushion. And this will make it very much easier to inspect your borders and to tampen out any immediate bleeding. Here on the left, the polyp is freshly cut off. It's under MBI, so the blood is very dark. then the stream directly into the defect, and on the left side, you see that there's less blood. The defect is nicely expanded. You can really inspect your margins there. Then you want to check for residual polyps, so really carefully examine the defect base for any evidence of residual tissue under white light, maybe some kind of virtual chromendoscopy technique. Check for the color, the vessels, the pit pattern, and ideally you do this, if you have a cap on your scope, you could use underwater imaging, really fill up the lumen with the cap and use near focus, and you get some really nice pictures. These ones we'll see some examples later in the videos. This is a nice picture where you have some residual polyp here on the margin clearly. And then if you're not sure, just take another piece. It's really important to have a normal margin if you want to do a safe cold snare resection. So making the defect larger, this will not cause a higher risk of bleeding, but just decrease your risk of recurrence or incomplete resection. So don't be afraid. If you're unsure, just take another piece.
John, it's Roland here. Can you hear me?
Can we get a dye spray?
John?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so we have a question here, and that is, would you even start polypectomy with this amount of polyps? Is there, in other words, are there any circumstances in which you wouldn't bother to remove any of these polyps? And I may have missed Arnold's question, but I think if you are removing polyps, where do you start? What criteria do you use to select ones, or how do you plan? Because there must be at least 100 or more there.
Yeah, I mean, he's got FAP rolling and they're all adenomas. He's already had a Whipple's, and I think we've got to try and remove them. It just requires multiple resections here. So I think you have to try and remove them. He's a relatively young person. You could just survey and leave them and then hope that something doesn't materialize. But the problem with surveillance is the interval between the surveillance and then looking for change. It's much safer to remove than to survey in this population, I think.
So can I just ask my in-house panel members here, firstly, Dominique, would you agree with John there? Do you, is that a fair question? Are there any circumstances you wouldn't remove these?
I think there are no polyps which are already highly dysplastic.
Yeah.
I think you have to discuss it with your patient. It takes a lot of time. You have to plan it. I think another option is to do a 6-monthly screening and see if polyps are getting bigger or getting lobulated, then you can resect them. For me, I think it's a lot of polyps to start with resection. Yes. That's my personal idea,
so you're raising
I should discuss a follow-up
with the patient
strategy with the patient, but
okay.
That's my personal opinion.
That's very helpful. Stephen, do you have a view on that?
So here I think we will start to removing polyps, but compared to the duodenum, where we know for those patients that we can downstage the Spiegel classification when we removed polyps during the surveillance, and we remove all the polyps bigger than 1 centimeter, for example, you can easily follow the patient and avoid the Whipple procedure in those patients. Here, of course, we don't know what's the behavior in this setting, but I think this is a good way to remove the big ones, and you will demonstrate the technique you use for that.
So I've got a cold snare.
But earlier on in the program, I made a plea for everybody in the conference now to, whenever it's appropriate, to pose a research question. And I think there's a really important health economic research question here, and that is that if you systematically apply shared decision making in average surveillance decisions, what are the consequences of that approach, and what are the costs? Because in England, the costs of implementing that would be huge, but on the other hand, the cost of doing all the surveillance is huge. So the question would be, is what is the impact of introducing systematically a shared decision-making approach for colonoscopy surveillance? What are the costs of delivering that? What do the decisions end up? How many procedures do you save because people say, well, I'm not going to bother with that, etc. We need that study. So if there's anybody out there who's interested in this and motivated to do that, I believe it will be a very important contribution to the literature.